Thank you, Minister. Senator Lambie.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is for the Minister representing the Minister of Veterans Affairs. Given that Vietnam Veterans Day is this Friday, the 18th of August, what historical lessons has the government learnt in creating equitable rehabilitation programs and compensation for veterans transitioning out of today's Defence Force?
The Minister for Defence representing the Minister for Veterans Affairs, Senator Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Lambie very much for your question. The number of Vietnam veterans that I know personally, including my partner's father and so many of his friends, have taught Australia and Australians a salutary lesson about how we should address rehabilitation, how we should approach that conversation that you have raised. I haven't had the benefit of reading the entire report to which I think you may refer, but in the decades that have passed since that time, we have incorporated those lessons and we have endeavoured to make the processes that we use and the work that the Department of Veterans Affairs does more responsive. You know yourself, Senator Lambie, that it has been an extraordinarily dynamic environment in recent times. We have a growth of ex-service organisations way beyond the RSL of those days, and many of us have watched them grow and supported them in the work and the efforts that they make. What we do know is we must have a much more effective transition from defence to ex-defence, if you like, from being a serving member of the ADF to being a veteran who may or may not be supported by Veterans Affairs, because we are of course aware that not every veteran chooses to engage in that way. So in that conversation we are working very hard, Minister Tehan and myself, on a much more seamless transition between the two organisations to make sure that nobody leaves Defence without the material and the support that they need to function, to provide for themselves in a world outside that environment. That may relate to medical records, it might relate to financial records, it might relate to psychological challenges, it might relate to all of those things combined. So we work very hard to make that transition as seamless as we possibly can.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Lambie, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Is the government able to tell the veterans community why it has waited for over a decade and still waiting in addressing long-standing inequities such as family law splitting, indexation of special rate pension and the Defence Force retirement and death benefits scheme?
Minister.
Mr President, thank you, Senator Lambie. There are a number of outstanding issues, most certainly, between the veterans community and government. Some of those governments of both colours, if you like, have been able to address over time. Others have not been resolved. They're matters that I discuss with the Minister for Veterans Affairs and, for that matter, the Prime Minister on a regular basis. I know that you have brought a number of those to the attention of the Chamber and to the attention of the government, and I'm very happy to continue those discussions.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Lambie, final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Is it possible that the Minister of Veterans Affairs' recent comments criticising the performance of the Department of Veterans Affairs has less to do with the competence of the public service and more to do with the inadequacy of ministerial direction?
Minister.
Mr President, I'm not able to comment on the Minister for Veterans Affairs' particular remarks. I'm not sure to what Senator Lambie is referring, to be honest, but clearly in the operation of government, whether it's the Department of Defence or the Department of Veterans Affairs, there are things that we do well. There are things that we can always do better. I think it's important for government to be able to acknowledge that, and that's one of the reasons I referred to our efforts to ensure a seamless transition for those who are wishing to leave Defence into the veterans space, whether they are a client of the Department of Veterans Affairs or not. That is very important for us to acknowledge the service that those men and women have given, what they have given to their countries, not just them but their families, and to make sure that we support them as best as we are possibly able to in their time after they leave the Defence organisation.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Carr.